There are forces of good and forces of evil at work in the world today. What are these forces? Who is responsible for the good? And who is responsible for the evil? Richard Shoff talks about current events which are rarely discussed by the mainstream media, events that affect us all. This program seeks to identify, to inform, and to equip the believer for what's ahead. Welcome to What in the World is Going On?
This is What in the World is Going On. I'm your host, Richard Shoff. Our program is sponsored by Lincoln Log Homes. We are pro-Christian, pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, pro-American, and here by the grace of God. First, let's take a look out at Texas and at our Supreme Court. I received a flyer from Silvio Canto. He asked, did Roe just get effectively overturned? He noted a few months ago Governor Greg Abbott signed his heartbeat law, and everyone on the left was screaming about it was going to the courts, to be up to the courts and to fight for reproductive rights. Canto noted, and I quote, "Frankly, I thought we'd be in the courts by now, but rather we're watching the new law go into effect." Well, what happened? The law was written in such a way that it makes it difficult to challenge in the courts. That from the Texas Tribune. One of the nation's most restrictive abortion bills, one which bans abortions as early as 6 months into pregnancy, took effect after the U.S. Supreme Court did not take action on an emergency appeal by Texas abortion providers. The law prohibits abortions whenever an ultrasound can detect what lawmakers defined as fetal heartbeat. Providers and abortion rights advocacy groups say this would affect at least 85% of the abortions taking place in Texas. But the state wouldn't enforce the law. SB 8 instead provides information on enforcement only by private citizens who would use abortion providers and anyone involved in abetting or involved in aiding an abortion after a heartbeat is detected. This mechanism would allow SB 8 to skirt Roe v. Wade, the 1973 Supreme Court decision that legalized abortion. Speaking more on the subject, I have a report here where it noted the Supreme Court votes not to block the Texas abortion law. The U.S. Supreme Court delivered a stunning victory to the pro-life community, refusing to block a Texas ban on abortion after 6 weeks of pregnancy. It's a major defeat for abortion rights. The decision also allows a law prohibiting the vast majority of abortions in the state to remain in place. The justices, on a 5-4 vote, denied an emergency request by abortion and women's rights providers for an injunction barring enforcement of the ban. That just went into effect, while litigation continues in the lawsuits challenging its constitutionality. The justices that voted for the babies, Justice Thomas, Alito, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett. Yep, they voted not to block the law. But Chief Justice Roberts joined the 3 liberals, Breyer, Sotomayor, and Keegan, in dissent. Hey, did you see this? I bet you didn't, but I got to tell you about it. Nancy Pelosi shocks the country by blocking the reading of 13 slain American troops on the House floor. Let's take a look at the situation in Afghanistan. But first, Speaker Nancy Pelosi has a reputation, a mark that she no longer has a reputation left. Nonetheless, she's pulled off the improbable with a callous, disrespectful act against America's military, against our Gold Star families, and the 13 slain U.S. service members who lost their lives due to Biden's reckless military withdrawal from Afghanistan. Pelosi reached a new low by blocking their names from being read on the House floor. Multiple congressmen reported this as Pelosi's dirty deed. How badly do Nancy Pelosi and the House Democrats want to cover up this Afghanistan debacle? A question asked by Representative Jimenez. They just blocked members of Congress from reading the names of the service members who sacrificed their lives in Afghanistan last week. Don't you think our military deserves better? The shocking, frankly shocking act of unpatriotic behavior was also remarked upon by Congressman Brian Mast, who gave his remarks to the paper down in Florida known as the Floridian. Representative Brian Mast, Republican congressman from Florida, himself a wounded combat veteran from Afghanistan, tells the Floridian that during a Republican-only moment of silence, Speaker Pelosi refused to recognize them, to read the names, or bring up bills, or anything. This, as reported in the Floridian. We gavelled in, we had a prayer, said the Pledge of Allegiance, took a moment of silence with pretty much all Republican veterans, then asked to be recognized to read names and bring up Afghanistan legislation. They did not acknowledge us and just closed the House down. A quote from Representative Mast. You had it right, a Republican-only moment of silence. It once again reveals that the Democrat Party shows no loyalty to our troops or even our nation. The Gateway Pundit put together a beautiful tribute to the 13 men and women who lost their lives serving those that were serving their country during President Biden's gutless surrender. Their memories will be honored with Republicans and other patriotic Americans, even if the Democrat Party seeks to forget them and to look to the future, as President Biden said he was going to do. Our own State Department admits the majority of Afghanistan and SIVs who helped us while we were in Afghanistan did not evacuate. So who were the 116,000 Afghans we've evacuated? According to the data provided by the U.S. Department of State, in the last few days, the total number of people evacuated from the Kabul airport was 122,000 people. Of those, 6,000 were American citizens, and 116,000 were Afghan refugees. The State Department, at that admission, begs the question, then who the heck are those 116,000 refugees? A senior Department of State official acknowledged for the first time that the majority of Afghanistans who helped the U.S. government over the last 20 years did not make it out of Kabul. Asked about SIV applicants left behind, the official said while they couldn't prove a number, it's the majority of them. And that is a quote from September 1st of this year. This is not just some NBC reporter relaying information. There are multiple reports of exactly the same dynamic. According to the Wall Street Journal, the U.S. left behind the majority of Afghan interpreters and others who applied for visas to flee Afghanistan. That a quote from a senior State Department official. He said this was despite frantic efforts to evacuate those at risk of Taliban retribution in the final week of the airlift. The U.S. still doesn't have reliable data on who was evacuated, nor for what type of visas they would qualify. This is a quote from the official. But initial assessments suggested most visa applicants didn't make it through the crush at the airport. I would say it's a majority of them, the official said. The Biden administration has said that from the end of July, the U.S. and allied nations evacuated more than 122,000 people from the country, most of whom were Afghans. The State Department estimates that fewer than 200 Americans that wanted to leave Afghanistan have been left behind. Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby said that near the end of the evacuation effort that the U.S. had been able to evacuate about 7,000 special immigrant visa applicants by that point. If 116,000 Afghans were evacuated, to lift a finger to look quizzingly at any of this. The upper chamber of Commerce is 100% in alignment with this import, and the lower house chamber is in full defense of Biden. By the way, that 110,000 Afghans, not the interpreters, the other ones, I've seen many reports that they're not even being properly vetted. I wonder how many are terrorists. I wonder how many have COVID or other diseases. Not much screening at all from what I'm picking up. Well, some Americans were unable to leave Afghanistan. The Pentagon says that some Americans who wanted to leave Afghanistan were unable to make it to the airport to board U.S. Evacuation flights before the complete evacuation of U.S. forces. General Kenneth McKenzie that bring any Americans out. The last American civilians were evacuated about 12 hours before the U.S. forces left. McKenzie said the effort to bring out Americans will now fall on diplomatic channels. Earlier this month, President Joe Biden pledged that the U.S. would remain in Afghanistan until it was able to get all of its citizens out of the country. If there's American citizens left, we're going to stay until we get them all out. A quote from President Biden to ABC News, and just another lie from our Commander-in-Chief. Meanwhile, I see where over 90 retired generals and admirals called for the Defense Secretary to resign. That's right, some 90 retired generals and admirals, the flag officers, signed a letter signing for the resignation of the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, based on their key roles involving events surrounding the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. The hasty retreat has left an unknown number of Americans stranded in dangerous areas controlled by a brutal enemy. Along with Afghans, the retired flag officer signers believe these top military advisors should have resigned as a matter of conscience and public statement. The consequences of this disaster are enormous, and they're going to reverberate for decades, beginning with the safety of Americans and Afghans who are unable to move safely to evacuation points, therefore being de facto hostages of the Taliban. The death and torture of Afghans has already begun. It's going to result in human tragedy of major proportions. In addition, the loss of billions of dollars in our advanced military equipment and supplies, that falling into the hands of our enemies, is catastrophic. The damage to the reputation of the United States is indescribable. We'll be seen for many years as an unreliable partner. This, when we're trying to form international agreements or operations. Trust in the United States is irreparably damaged. Moreover, now our adversaries are emboldened to move against America due to our weakness, as we show. This letter calls on General Austin and General Milley to resign. A fundamental principle in the military is holding those in charge responsible and accountable for their decisions and inactions. There must be accountability at all levels for this tragic and avoidable debacle. Related to the whole thing, I've reported on this before, but another article hit my desk. Going to remind you of it. Former White House doctor noted Biden's cognitive issues worsening the Afghan chaos. A cognitive test would only confirm what everybody in this country already knows, and that's that he doesn't have the capacity and the cognitive ability to be our commander-in-chief. That's a quote from Republican Representative Ronnie Jackson, now representing a district in Texas, formerly the White House physician. Representative Jackson, the former White House doctor for President Obama and Trump, told Just the News that President Biden has cognitive, quote, issues that are worsening the situation in Afghanistan. He noted this during the evacuation of U.S. citizens and Afghan allies, and he noted it is impacting our safety and our national security. His words, end quote. Jackson previously called for Biden to take the same cognitive exam that he administered to former President Donald Trump. Given the deteriorating situation in Afghanistan as the military withdraws from the country, Jackson urged that Biden's cognitive issues are now clear. I still believe this needs to happen, but the reality is I don't even think it's to the point where he needs the test anymore. Again, quoting Dr. Jackson. He's been criticizing Biden for claiming al-Qaeda is no longer in Afghanistan. I think he's proven to the entire country right now that he has issues, and these issues are impacting our safety and our national security. Continuing to quote Dr. Jackson, I think it's obvious at this point. I think a test won't do anything but confirm what everybody in this country already knows, is that he doesn't have the competency and the cognitive ability to be our commander-in-chief and lead this country, and he needs to step down and let somebody else do it. Jackson, a retired U.S. Navy Rear Admiral, said it was comical for Biden to suggest Al-Qaeda, the largest territory group responsible for the September 11, 2001 attack, to say that they are gone in Afghanistan, contradicting both reports from the United Nations and U.S. intelligence community made earlier this year. Anybody that follows the last 20 years know that there's still a faction of Al-Qaeda and ISIS in that area. And by the way, folks, for me, wasn't it ISIS-K, that just claimed responsibility for the killing of those 13 American troops? And they're gone? And Biden said it? Wow. Jackson, now a member of the House Armed Services and Foreign Relations Committee, was the first chief medical advisor to the President of the United States. Jackson questioned why Biden would tell the public Al-Qaeda isn't in Afghanistan when the intelligence community has briefed Congress about their presence in the region. Has his own administration, people in the West Wing of the White House, have they lost faith in him as well, he asked? Do they still not tell him anything? Or why? Is it because they realize he's not capable of processing it? Are they just making the decisions on their own somewhere? Did he forget? I mean, it's also, in my opinion, some cognitive issues that can be part of it as well. Again, I'm quoting Dr. Jackson. Hey, did you see this? Did you see where Nancy Pelosi got caught on an open mic? Yep, she did. I can tell you about it. A video recently surfaced showing Speaker Nancy Pelosi caught on a hot mic during the 46th president's appearance at a House Democrat caucus event with President Biden. This event happened in March of 2021. The president was speaking and he said, and I'm quoting the president, "I'm happy to take questions if that's what I'm supposed to do. Nance, whatever you want me to do." A quote from Biden. A quote from Pelosi on an open mic. "Am I off?" she asks an aide. "No, we don't want him to talk." Quoting Pelosi. Enough said. Crash and burn. Biden's approval rating craters to 41% as Afghanistan unravels. This, a few days old, was on the Hannity staff. Joe Biden's approval rating plunged to 41% as his exit strategy from Afghanistan has sent the country into chaos, raising new questions in the Democrat Party about the fate of the upcoming midterm election. For President Joe Biden, the cost of the war's chaotic end has been steep. His overall approval rating now stands at 41%, who approve him versus 55% who disapprove. It's a big drop. Until just a couple of weeks ago, his national poll showed his approval rating still holding above 50%. While he's held a backing of 87% of Democrats, only 32% of the independents saying is a good job. President Biden's overall approval rating has taken a turn for the worse, most recently due to his awful job performance rating on Afghanistan. His approval rating on immigration and the economy are also upside down. Press Secretary Jen Psaki held her daily briefing at the White House, where she informed reporters that it's now irresponsible to claim that American citizens are stranded in Afghanistan. I think it's irresponsible to say that Americans are stranded. They are not, she noted. We are committed to bringing Americans who want to come home able to do so. I guess they're not informing her much either. A report from Reuters highlights the scope of the crisis unfolding in Afghanistan as the agency claims the Taliban now control 2,000 American-made vehicles and between 30 and 40 aircraft. Joe Biden created the Taliban Army and Air Force, posted former Trump official Richard Grenell. It'd be humorous if it wasn't so sad and so tragic. Terry Paulding wrote, and I'm referencing his article, he asked, are we helplessly witnessing America's destruction? In government, the secret is integrity. Use it and you'll be like a pole star, always dwelling in its proper place with other stars turning reverently about it. If you use government to show them the way and punishment to keep them true, the people will grow evasive and lose all remorse. But if you use integrity to show them the way and ritual to keep them true, they'll cultivate remorse and always see deeply into things. Now we have a completely lack of integrity in every facet of our government, leading us to a lack of faith by the people. It's ironic to choose ancient Chinese wisdom to explain this. Is it? No, I don't think so. What we've done by installing Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and the Democrat-run Congress is sell our country's soul. The beneficiary will be the Chinese communists. Hopefully, we haven't gone too far to wrest it back if we can just wake up our impotent congressional toadies and weak-wristed courts and demand that they find the cojones to take appropriate, immediate, drastic action to end this threat to our existence. The worst, most in-your-face example by far is what's happening in Afghanistan. Coupled with our chaotic border, we're inviting a violent and destabilizing reign of terror aimed squarely at our homeland. The Biden administration was installed through deceit, and it's rapidly, finally, becoming an albatross, even to Democrats. Biden's actions have exposed the abject degrading of our government. We knew that Biden sold out to the Chinese well before he assumed office, and he proves it every day, with the most recent example being his platering up billions in sophisticated weaponry, served like luxury hors d'oeuvres for our enemies to take from us in Afghanistan, and of course, to turn them against us. Even if all these weapons go to Pakistan, not China, terrorism against us will serve them. Biden's given the Chinese a gift, his actions clearly demonstrating to the world that we're a toothless paper tiger, one they can take advantage of and will in every way. Listen to people who have first-hand knowledge of what's happening to our citizens in Afghanistan, including the phone calls some of them have recorded with friends trying to help from here. The inhumanity of Biden's ineptitude is treasonous, and I'll never use that word without intention. Listen to our citizens' anguish. They face torture and death, and they know it. They are trapped with nowhere to turn. They have no faith in the military and our government to rescue them. The government doesn't even know how many people need to be rescued. Biden opted to close Bagram Air Force Base, destabilizing our mission, and then he pulled the last 2,500 troops, all so that he could crow about symbolism on the anniversary of 9/11. This decision has destroyed 20 years of progress in a matter of weeks. He installed ruthless, soulless cavemen barbarians posing as a government. He's had to rush in triple the number of troops he wanted to remove to deal with the chaos that he created, all micromanaged by superiors safely watching from D.C. He's betrayed the trust of every single Afghan citizen who chose to help us, now all marked for death, along with their entire families, except, of course, for young girls of marriageable age. That's 9 years old in Afghanistan. Biden's actions have destroyed U.S. credibility on the world stage. Lies by the media, the tech mongols, as much as Biden himself, are to blame. They created this monster. They're all collectively betrayed our citizens, our allies in the world. Other governments know it, and we've lost our standing as a great nation because of it. We're a country that threw integrity overboard, and we're reaping predictable results. We have no border. We have no idea who's in our country or who's coming. Our government values the refugees of the world over its own citizenry. Remember border stability, financial stability, our growing economy, our ability to supply our own energy needs, our excellent relationship with our allies, the respect by our enemies. We had 4 years of peace under Trump, and in 9 months, we're on a trajectory to doom. We who endeavor to live with integrity have always seen through the farce. We've shouted, but nobody listened. Greed and a thirst for absolute power permeate our government tech complex. Biden used Hunter as a playing piece as he sold out to China, so the Chinese have moved ever closer to power over us. But it doesn't even stop with him. Everyone from the highest echelons of power to deep state peons have a stake in our ruination, all for their personal gain. Too bad we're all getting the bill. Their gain will prove illusionary as our economy and strength crumble. The greatest country in the world could be destroyed in just a few more months. We can only hope it's not too late to stop. And in closing, from Charisma magazine that I take, a story on a preacher, a Canadian preacher who said, "Don't fear men, fear God." A Canadian pastor tells his church this after serving 18 days in jail. Pastor Tim Stevens urges other believers to continue proclaiming Christ. After 17 nights and 18 days, Canadian pastor Tim Stevens walked away from his Calgary, Alberta, Canada jail cell and with tears in his eyes delivered a heartfelt sermon in which he urged congregants not to fear, taking a stand for Christ. Stevens was arrested June 14th after his underground church met for the second week in a row following the shutdown of its campus for violating province COVID-19 rules. He had previously been arrested May 16th and spent 2 nights in jail. Stevens' wife, Raquel, posted her elation on Instagram, quoting Hebrews 13:23, "You should know that our brother Timothy has been released," and adding that Alberta lifted all health restrictions, including the ones that required my husband to tell people what to wear, where to stand, not to come to church, and not to practice hospitality. Stephen told his congregations he was encouraged that many of you were strengthened and emboldened in your faith. Some people are standing to make a difference. Would to God that we had more Pastor Stevens in this world, even including in America. But think on these as we have the despair, the discouraging news that I've had to force with you today. Don't fear men, fear God. Goodbye until next week.